There are days when the mountains seem close enough to touch, and there are days when they disappear completely. The old people in the valley used to say that the mountains were never truly hidden. "They are only wearing clouds," they would whisper. Most children laughed at those stories, but Heidi never did. She believed mountains had their own moods. Sometimes they welcomed visitors with golden sunlight. Sometimes they sang with rushing streams. Sometimes they painted rainbows across the sky. And sometimes they wrapped themselves in quiet white clouds, asking everyone to slow down. On one peaceful morning, Heidi would discover that losing the path is not always the same as being lost. Sometimes, the mountain hides the way, only so we can learn to trust something deeper than our eyes. The cabin was unusually quiet that morning. Heidi woke before grandfather's footsteps. No birds were singing. No breeze danced through the little round window. Even the goats outside seemed strangely silent. She climbed down from the loft and walked toward the door. When she opened it, the world had disappeared. Not the mountains, not the trees, not the meadow. Only they could no longer be seen. Everything beyond the fence had dissolved into thick white mist. It was as though someone had covered the whole mountain with a soft blanket of clouds. Heidi stood perfectly still. She had never seen the world so quiet. Grandfather joined her a moment later, carrying 2 cups of warm milk. He smiled when he saw her expression. The clouds came down. Heidi reached out her hand into the mist. "It feels like the sky is visiting us," Grandfather chuckled softly. "Or perhaps we're visiting the sky," she laughed. "I can't even see the big pine tree." "You don't need to." "Why?" "Because it's still there." Heidi looked into the white silence again. "How do you know?" Grandfather rested one strong hand on the fence. "Not everything must be seen to be real." Those words stayed inside Heidi's heart. Breakfast felt warmer than usual. The little cabin glowed with firelight while the mist wrapped itself around the windows. Outside, nothing moved. Inside, everything felt peaceful. Grandfather sliced fresh bread. Heidi spread honey across one warm piece. The smell filled the room. "It feels like we're inside a cloud," Grandfather nodded. "We are." "Will the sun come?" "Perhaps." "When?" "The mountain decides." Heidi smiled. "The mountain decides everything." Grandfather looked toward the white window. "No." "What then?" "It only teaches patience." A familiar whistle drifted through the mist. Peter. But the sound was much closer than usual. Moments later, Peter appeared from the white fog almost like a ghost. His hair was damp. Tiny drops of mist covered his jacket. "I almost missed the path," he admitted. Grandfather poured him warm milk. Peter wrapped both hands around the cup. "It gets thicker higher up." Heidi looked excited. "Can we still take the goats?" Peter hesitated. "I don't know." Grandfather remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he stood and walked toward the doorway. The fog had become even thicker. The fence disappeared only a few steps away. Even Swanley was little more than a white shadow. Grandfather turned back. "You may go." Peter looked surprised. "Really?" "But," he continued, "you must promise me 3 things." The children nodded. "Stay together." "We will." "If either of you cannot see the other, stop walking." Both nodded again. "And most importantly," he looked directly at Heidi, "if the mountain hides the path, listen before you move." Heidi repeated the words quietly. "Listen before you move." Grandfather smiled. "Good." The goats stepped into the mist, one after another. Their bells became the only way to know where they were. Sometimes Swanley appeared only a few feet ahead. Then she disappeared again. Barely wandered into the fog. Only her bell remained. Heidi laughed. "I can hear everyone." "But I can't see anyone." Peter smiled. "My grandmother says fog teaches goats to stay together." "Does it?" "No. It teaches shepherds." They laughed together. The laughter floated into the white morning and seemed to disappear without an echo. The climb felt completely different. The familiar mountain had become new again. Every rock appeared suddenly from the mist. Every tree waited until the very last moment before revealing itself. The forest seemed larger, quieter, almost magical. Tiny drops of water rested on every pine needle. Spiderwebs sparkled with thousands of tiny diamonds. The air smelled wonderfully fresh. Heidi slowed her steps. "I like this." Peter looked surprised. "You aren't scared?" She smiled. "No." "Why not?" She thought for a moment. "Because the mountain is still here." Peter looked into the endless white fog. "I suppose that's true. At the stream." They stopped. Usually the water danced brightly in the sunlight. Today, it appeared from nowhere, flowing quietly through the white world before disappearing again. The little bird landed beside the stream. Its feathers were covered with tiny drops of mist. Heidi crouched beside it. "You aren't afraid either." The bird shook itself. Tiny droplets flew into the air like silver dust. Peter laughed. "I think it's laughing at us." The bird chirped once, then flew deeper into the fog, almost inviting them to follow. Heidi watched until it vanished completely. "It knows the way." Peter looked toward the hidden forest. "I hope so." Far above them, hidden beyond the white clouds, the mountain waited patiently, watching, listening, keeping one more lesson, ready for two children who had not yet discovered that before the day was over, they would lose something far more important than a bell. They would lose the path itself, and only trust would bring them home. The higher they climbed, the quieter the mountain became. Even the goats, who usually wandered happily from one patch of grass to another, stayed close together. The thick white mist had changed everything. The mountain no longer looked familiar. The old stones seemed different. The pine trees appeared suddenly from the clouds, only to disappear again a few moments later. It felt as though the mountain had become a dream. Peter walked in front. His hand rested firmly on his shepherd's stick. Every few steps he stopped to listen. Not to see, to listen. The bells of the goats had become more important than their eyes. Heidi remembered grandfather's words. "If the mountain hides the path, listen before you move." She repeated them quietly inside her mind. The little bird appeared again. It landed on a low branch only a few feet away. Its tiny feathers were covered with shining drops of mist. It chirped once, then disappeared again, almost as though it knew a path hidden inside the clouds. After another long climb, they reached where the sky meadow should have been. But today, there was no meadow, only white. The flowers were hidden beneath the mist. The distant peaks had vanished. Even the spring could only be heard. Its gentle water whispered somewhere nearby, invisible beneath the clouds. Heidi closed her eyes. "I can hear it." Peter smiled. "The spring?" "Yes. It sounds closer than yesterday." Peter nodded. "When we can't see, our ears become better." The words reminded Heidi of grandfather. Perhaps the mountain really was teaching them something. The goats began grazing, Their bells drifted gently through the mist. Sometimes one bell sounded close. Sometimes another seemed very far away. The sounds floated strangely inside the clouds. Heidi laughed. The bells sound like stars. Peter looked confused. Stars don't make sounds. They would, if we could hear them. Peter smiled. You always think strange things. Do you think they're strange? No. He looked around the white mountain. I think they're mountain thoughts. They ate their bread beside the hidden spring. Although they could not see much farther than a few yards, everything felt peaceful. The mist wrapped itself around the grass like soft wool. Tiny drops rested upon every flower. The whole meadow smelled of fresh rain. Suddenly, the little bird flew overhead. Not once, not twice. 3 quick circles. Then it disappeared into the fog. Peter stood immediately. Did you see that? Heidi nodded. It has never done that before. The bird chirped loudly somewhere ahead. Then again. Peter frowned. It wants us to follow. Heidi hesitated. Or it wants us to stop. Before either child could decide, a loud bell rang somewhere beyond the mist. Not Swanley, not Barely. One of the smaller goats. Peter's face changed immediately. Something's wrong. Another frightened bleat echoed through the clouds, this time much farther away. Peter ran. Heidi followed. Peter! Stay close! The white mist swallowed them almost instantly. The bells of the other goats faded behind. Soon, they could hear only one frightened little bell. Then, even that disappeared. Peter stopped. His breathing had become heavy. He turned in every direction. Nothing. Only white clouds. Only silence. Only the sound of their own hearts. We went too far. Heidi looked behind them. There was no path anymore. No spring, no meadow, no goats, only fog. For the first time that day, Peter looked frightened. I don't know where we are. Heidi's own heart began beating faster. She wanted to look everywhere at once. But then, she remembered. Listen before you move. She gently touched Peter's arm. Don't walk. Peter looked at her. What? Grandfather. Peter understood immediately. The 2 children stood completely still. No talking, no footsteps, no searching, only listening. Slowly, other sounds returned. A tiny stream somewhere to the left, wind brushing pine needles behind them. A goat bell, very faint, to the right, then another, much closer. Peter whispered, They're together. Heidi smiled. So are we. The little bird suddenly landed on a rock only a few feet away. It chirped twice, then flew only a short distance, waiting. Peter looked at Heidi. It really is showing us. They followed slowly, not because they could see, but because they listened. Every few moments the bird stopped. Every few moments the bells became a little louder. The stream moved beside them once again. Then, through the mist, appeared the first blue flowers of the sky meadow. Peter laughed with relief. We're back. Heidi looked around. The goats were standing quietly beside the spring, as though nothing had happened. Even Barely looked innocent. Peter counted quickly. 1, 2, 3. All of them. Every single goat. The frightened little goat that had wandered away was already standing safely beside Swanley. Peter scratched his head. But we followed the wrong sound. Heidi smiled gently. No. Peter looked puzzled. What do you mean? We followed fear. Peter thought about that for a long moment. Then he slowly nodded. I think you're right. They rested quietly beside the spring. Neither child spoke for several minutes. The mist had begun to grow even thicker, but somehow it no longer felt frightening. It felt peaceful, as though the mountain had wrapped everything in one enormous blanket. The little bird drank from the spring, then looked toward Heidi. She smiled. "Thank you." The bird answered with one tiny chirp, then disappeared once again into the white clouds. Peter watched it fly away. "I don't think it was leading us." "No, I think..." He looked toward the hidden forest. "It was reminding us not to panic." Heidi smiled. "That's something Grandfather would say." Peter laughed quietly. It probably learned it from him. The children gathered the goats once more. The bells rang together. Soft, gentle, comforting. The clouds still covered the mountain. But now, Heidi understood something she had never known before. You do not always need to see the path, if you trust the voices that have always guided you. For a long while, no one spoke. The children sat beside the spring while the goats grazed quietly around them. The fog still wrapped the sky meadow in gentle white silence. The world felt smaller than it had that morning, not because the mountains had changed, but because the clouds had hidden everything except what truly mattered. The spring, the goats, Peter, the little bird. Heidi smiled softly. Perhaps that was enough. Peter broke the silence first. "I thought we were lost." Heidi looked into the clear water. "So did I." Peter picked up a small stone and turned it slowly in his hand. "I've walked these paths hundreds of times. I know. But today, I couldn't even find the meadow." Heidi watched the water flowing around smooth rocks. "My grandfather once said that the mountain never disappears." Peter looked at her. "We do." Heidi smiled. "Maybe." Just then, a familiar sound drifted through the mist. Not a goat bell, not the spring, a whistle, 3 short notes. Peter stood immediately. "Grandfather." The whistle came again, closer this time. Heidi smiled. He came. Peter looked toward the white wall of clouds. "I told him we'd be fine." Heidi laughed quietly. "Grandfathers don't always wait to be asked." Moments later, a tall shadow slowly appeared through the fog. First his walking stick, then his broad shoulders. Finally, Grandfather himself stepped out of the mist. He looked exactly as calm as he always did, almost as though walking through clouds was the most ordinary thing in the world. Heidi ran to him. "You came." Grandfather smiled. "I said I would trust you." He looked kindly at Peter. "But sometimes, trust also means coming to meet someone halfway." Peter lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry." Grandfather gently rested one hand on the boy's shoulder. "For what?" "I lost the path." Grandfather shook his head. "No." He looked around the hidden meadow. "You found it again?" Peter looked surprised. "But we wandered." "Yes." "And then?" Peter thought carefully. "We stopped. And then we listened." Grandfather nodded with quiet satisfaction. "Exactly." The old man sat beside the spring. For several moments, he simply listened to the flowing water. Then he spoke. "My grandfather used to tell me something whenever the clouds came down." Heidi leaned closer. "What did he say?" Grandfather smiled. "When the mountain hides its face, it is asking you to walk with your heart." Peter looked toward the mist. "I think I understand." Grandfather nodded. "When people can see everything, they often stop paying attention. But fog changes that." He looked at the goats. "You hear every bell." He looked toward the trees. "You notice every bird." He placed one hand upon the earth. You even remember to feel where you're standing. Heidi looked down at the soft grass beneath her boots. The mountain did feel different today. She had noticed things she had never noticed before. The smell of wet pine, the sound of distant water, the warmth of Peter walking beside her, the comfort of the goats' familiar bells. Perhaps the clouds had not hidden the mountain. Perhaps they had revealed it, almost as though the mountain had heard Grandfather's thoughts. A gentle breeze moved across the meadow. The mist stirred. Slowly, very slowly, the white curtain began to drift away. First, a single patch of blue sky appeared. Then, the highest mountain peak emerged from the clouds. Golden sunlight touched its snowy summit. Heidi gasped. "It's coming back," Grandfather smiled. It never left. Little by little, the sky meadow returned. The blue flowers appeared once more. The distant cliffs emerged. The ancient pine stood proudly on the ridge. Even the valley below slowly revealed itself. Clouds flowed gently beneath the mountains like slow white rivers. Peter looked across the breathtaking view. "I've never seen it like this," Grandfather nodded. "Very few people do." The little bird suddenly appeared above the meadow. It circled once through the sunlight, then landed upon a nearby stone. Its feathers sparkled with tiny drops of water. Heidi laughed. "You waited for the sunshine too." The bird chirped happily. The journey home felt completely different. The same path, the same forest, the same stream. Yet everything seemed brighter. Every pine tree glowed in the afternoon light. Every flower shone with fresh color. Even Barely behaved herself, at least for a little while. Peter smiled. "I think she's tired," Heidi laughed. "Or maybe she learned something." Peter looked at the goat. "I hope I learned more than she did." When they reached the cabin, the evening sun painted the wooden walls with warm golden light. The goats settled happily near the fence. Grandfather lit the fire. Soon the little cabin filled with the comforting smell of burning pine wood. Heidi curled up on her favorite bench. Peter sat nearby with a warm cup of milk between his hands. Outside, the last clouds drifted away toward the western mountains. Grandfather looked into the fire. "You know," he said quietly, "shepherds have always respected days like this." Heidi looked up. "Why?" "Because clouds remind us of something very important." "What?" Grandfather smiled. "The safest traveler is not the one who always knows the way, but the one who knows when to stop." The cabin became wonderfully quiet. The fire crackled softly. The kettle whispered above the flames. Outside, the evening birds sang one final song before night. Peter smiled. "I think I'll remember today," Grandfather nodded. "So will the mountain." After supper, Peter started down toward the valley. The little bird followed him as far as the ancient pine before turning back toward the cabin. Heidi watched until both disappeared into the fading light. Then she climbed into her little bed beneath the round window. The sky above the Alps was perfectly clear again. Thousands of stars filled the darkness. The mountains stood peacefully beneath them, strong, silent, unchanged. Heidi thought about the fog. At sunrise, she had wished it would disappear. Now, she was almost grateful it had come. Because without the clouds, she never would have discovered that courage sometimes means standing still. That friendship sometimes means walking side by side without speaking. That trust is often found long before the path becomes clear. She closed her eyes. Outside, the ancient pine whispered gently beneath the stars. The little bird rested safely among its branches. The goats slept peacefully. the mountain breathed its slow, endless breath. And somewhere beyond the highest ridge, the last white cloud quietly disappeared into the night. For Heidi had learned that day that the clearest paths are not always the ones we can see. Sometimes they are the ones we learn to follow, with patience, with kindness, and with a heart willing to listen before taking the next step.